Welcome to this 10-part series about the Danish author Martinus, hosted by me, Lauge Schøler, and my co-host Karsten Jensen. The aim of this series is to provide an in-depth overview of Martinus and his work, The Third Testament. Martinus is mostly known in Scandinavia. However, there is a growing interest around the world in non-dogmatic approaches to spirituality, and as such, many non-Scandinavian speakers whom we assume will find his teachings interesting. But since most material about Martinus is in Danish, it can be a challenge for people outside of Scandinavia to know where to start or get a proper overview of the material. Over these 10 episodes, we dive into some technical detail as we try to convey some of Martinus' ideas. Martinus' work is vast and complex and takes up over 10,000 written pages, but we have picked 10 of the most central ideas to explore. We strive to make it as accessible as possible, and we hope it can provide the initial understanding of the most basic concepts that will make further study of his text more digestible. If you're interested in Martinus and his cosmology, you're welcome to visit martinus.dk for more information. In Denmark, there's an institute in Copenhagen which maintains the day-to-day administration, and there is a summer holiday center in Klint in northern Sjælland, where people interested in Martinus meet and study his works. Please enjoy. All right, so this is episode number 7. This is about the micro and the macro and disease and health. And for visual aid, it'll be very helpful if you could look up symbol number 7 on the website. It's about fractals, and it perfectly illustrates what we're talking about.
And the name of the symbol is the principle of life units, or you could perhaps translate it to the principle of the unity of life. Yeah. And it has to do with this fact that what's the kind of ontological meaning? Mm-hmm. I'll have to explain that, but in philosophy, we talk about an ontological basis of existence. That means what exists, what's the basic elements of existence. Mm-hmm. And so Martinus would say that the basic elements of existence is life units. Mm-hmm. So it's life units all the way down and all the way up. Yeah. And we've touched upon that before in previous episodes.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that later here as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also we can just define what it means by micro and meso and macro, so that micro is everything that's beneath you, organs, cells, molecules, and so on. And meso, or the middle level, is other human beings on your same level that you interact with. And
other creatures more generally.
Yeah, other creatures. And then macro is the being above you that you are embedded in the same way that beings below you are embedded in you.
Yeah, so micro beings live within us and we live within macro beings.
Yeah.
Together with meso beings, you could say.
Yeah. And so our macro being is Earth, and Earth's macro being is the solar system, and the solar system macro being is the galaxy, and so on and so forth. And an interesting idea is that there's literally no limit upwards or downwards. This is what this fractal symbols shows, that and that's one of the very interesting finer points about Martinus' cosmology, is that through his cosmic consciousness and his intuition, he said he could not get to a lowest limit or a highest limit in terms of going down into the micro or going up into the macro. You can literally continue forever and ever and ever downwards and forever and ever upwards. Because, I remember before I read Martinus, I thought, well, there must be some kind of goo or thug or something that is the lower limit of existence, and there must be some outer limit of some edge of the circle in terms of how big the universe is. But that's not the case. It continues forever upwards and downwards. So he gives the example that you can have like a pea, and you can slice the pea, and you can keep slicing the pea and keep slicing and keep slicing. And then at some point, physically, you cannot slice it with a knife anymore, but you can continue it in your mind to half it and half it and half it and half it. And so forever and ever and ever downwards.
Yeah, and here we could talk a little about the method of exploration in spiritual science, which is different from natural science. Yeah. So it's kind of a strong postulate from Martinus that although you cannot physically slide a piece, say infinitely, you can kind of travel in your thoughts. So you can make the thought experiment that you go on doing that. And of course, it's a bit special that Martinus have this postulate that if we are balanced beings, then what we imagine as we go on slicing it up will actually be the truth of the matter.
Sure.
And so this is something we have to get used to, that there's a limit to how much we can explore the universe through measurement and physical observation.
Yeah.
So at some point we have to let go of the physical world and the physical tools we have to measure and observe with our senses and so on. But that doesn't mean the exploration of the universe stops there.
Yeah. He said it has also a point about that scientists, especially materialist and atheist scientists, they think they'll find meaning through microscopes and telescopes. If you just keep looking upwards and downwards and keep examining the physical matter, then you will somehow arrive at the final solution, right? But that's not how it is. It's just like the meaning is between.
Yeah, you mean in the empty space? Yeah, because the meaning is something you find in consciousness.
Exactly.
And no matter how much you observe the universe through your physical senses and the extension of physical senses, you'll never encounter consciousness. What you'll encounter is empty space, vacuum somehow. And there Martinus makes the point that what we physically experience as empty space is actually consciousness. It's thoughts, it's ideas. Yeah. So the whole universe is kind of pervaded with...
It's teeming with spiritual life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, true. Yeah, and we touched upon it last time that like you go downwards inside you in organs and cells and molecules, and you go upwards in planets and solar systems and galaxies, and that all these beings and organs and so on, planets, they are designed in the spiritual world and then incarnated in the physical matter.
Yeah, and maybe you should say that Martinus doesn't use the term molecules. He talks about matter particles. Yeah. But he probably means something like organic molecules or something like that as the lower limit within, as the smallest, you could say, principle of organism.
Exactly. And that's also as an interesting point that he says that our thoughts are actually micro beings that are so many spiral cycles below us that we cannot detect them, but they're kind of permeating through our brains as thought structures, right? Yeah,
it's like it's more like the effect that our thinking has on the physical side of existence happens deep down.
Yeah.
So deep down, there's kind of, it's the way I think about it, because Martinus is not very precise here, but it's like we can, at our level, we can become inspired by beings in the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that our thoughts and ideas are somehow an inspiration deep down. But I think it has to go through the spiritual levels at that level, or those spiritual realms at that level.
Yeah.
And from this spiritual realm, there's an effect into the physical domain.
Yeah.
And maybe, and I don't know if you, I don't know if you've planned that we should talk about how as we travel into the microcosm, so we have these molecular structures that are rather large, but as we travel further down, we will encounter kind of minuscule galaxies and solar systems and so on.
Yeah, as a metaphor, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's more than a metaphor, because there are some principles that, so we can actually come to understand the microcosm and how it works by looking at our own macrocosm and how that affects us.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the things that he will mention very often is how life on this planet is dependent on the sun and solar light.
Yeah.
And this is in principle like the relation between the nucleus of an atom and the electrons of the atom.
Yeah.
So in Martinus's view, and he would use that term electrons are simply planets at a super microscopic level. And the nucleus of the atoms are like little suns. And just like the sun is energizing life on this planet, the same thing is happening in the microcosm. And this is where our behavior, our nutrition, but also our thoughts and mental state can have an effect on our well-being. Because whatever we think and the kind of state we're in will kind of affect you could say, the energetic levels. So there can occur some kind of overstimulation, but also understimulation. And that create kind of catastrophes in the microcosm. And this is what we experience as sickness or bad health.
Exactly. And the interesting is, as I mentioned before, that it continues forever upwards. I mean, he's just like, beyond the galaxy, it fades away so much that it doesn't have any much influence on us. But in principle, in actual fact, it continues forever, right? So you can see, like, when you zoom out in the grandest scale of the universe, you have these galaxy clusters and then these filaments. And that's the most trippy part. If you look at, like, the structure of neurons in a brain, juxtaposed next to the structure of the universe with these macro galactic filaments, it looks almost the same. I don't know if you have seen that.
Oh, I haven't seen that. But Martinus often makes the point that when we're looking up into the macrocosmos and are seeing all these galaxies and so on, they're actually part of huge creatures.
Exactly.
So which would have, say, organ systems and so on, just like us.
Exactly. And then he mentions that's because you can see, like, then these galactic filaments, they're just tiny. Like, what do you see as the known universe? It's just a tiny, tiny part of a much grander physical being that then of itself has, like, a physical life and a physical cycle of incarnation and reincarnation embedded in a much grander universe again, and so on and so forth. It gets really trippy when you think about that.
And also there's a shift in the temporal dimensions, you could say. So things, I mean, what is maybe 1,000 years for us is just a blink of an eye at some of these different levels. So as you move up into the macrocosm, time goes much slower. As you move down into the microcosm, time goes much faster than on our level. Yeah,
you have, like, beings incarnating and discarnating at a rapid pace within you all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And also, he mentioned also that, which I've tried myself, if you go to the beach at night, for instance, and you look up in the sky and you can see the great band of the Milky Way, and if you have a clear night sky, that what you're looking into is a huge organism. And I think that just shift in perspective makes it much more interesting. Instead of just dead matter, you can see, like, you're standing in a huge organism and looking into it.
Yeah, so the exact comparison that he makes is that they're like organ systems.
Yeah.
So if he looks into the human, so he actually makes this thought experiment and invite us to make the same thought experiment, that we travel down into the microcosm.
Yeah.
And so we travel down through all these levels, through organ systems, cells, matter particles, whatever they are, and down into even smaller components. And then we come into these small galaxies and at a deeper level, solar systems, minuscule planets, and on these planets, organisms.
Yeah.
And there he talks about, seen from this point of view, where you go downwards and eventually end up say, on a planet in a solar system in this super microcosm.
Yeah.
And you're looking up to what is, from this point of perspective, a macrocosm, but it's actually our own organism we're looking into.
Yeah.
And then we'll see our organ systems as galaxies.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a little uncertain to what degree he's speaking metaphorically here or symbolically.
Yeah, sure.
It might not be exactly in detail. So it's more like the principle he wants to demonstrate.
Exactly. Yeah, it might not look exactly like a spiral galaxy, but the general point is there.
Yeah. So we have to come to understand our body as a system of galaxies and solar systems and so on.
Exactly, and it gives much more reverence, I'd say, and much more love for your own body and your own organism and your organs. So it's not just dead matter that just happened to evolve through evolution. It's like it's these smaller beings that are working in conjunction with you to keep you going. And I think if you have that perspective, you can develop much more greater love for this vehicle that you're walking around in.
Yeah, it makes me think about Immanuel Kant, who was a German philosopher who said that the two things that made him feel awe, and that was looking at the starry sky beyond us and the moral law within us.
Yeah.
But actually, what Martinus is suggesting is that there's not only a starry sky beyond, but it's also within.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and also he mentioned that everything is according to a plan. Is like the universe and the cosmos is extremely well planned out, because most atheist astronomers and so on, they say it's completely random that our planet is locked in this Goldilocks zone around the sun, where it's not too hot and not too cold, and just perfect conditions for life. But he says, Martinus says that's not random at all. It's like that's definitely part of the plan, that planets with life will emerge in that particular zone where it's possible for microbeings to emerge in that space, and then they have microbeings within them too, and so on.
Yeah, and what plan means here is not that something is planned in advance, but more like, or in a sense it is, but it's more like it's the will of macrocosmic living beings.
Yeah.
So there's a desire and a will that kind of hold this planet in its particular place.
Exactly.
And create these conditions for animal and human life and plants and so on.
Yeah. And also he mentioned that there's no Big Bang. And that's...
Well, that there is perhaps a Big Bang, but it's, as he say, it's only a local explosion.
Yeah, he mentioned that he cannot rule out that there were certain local explosions, because explosions happen all the time, both in the macro and the...
So it's not like he wants to contradict the observations that indicate that there was some kind of explosion in the past, and there's this gradual expansion of the universe. Yeah. But it's more like it's something local in his view.
Exactly, because because what it looks like for astronomers in our particular corner of the universe is that everything is moving apart, the galaxies and so on. But it might just be in our little corner, there's a certain expansion at the moment.
Yeah. So can it be like an inhalation and exhalation? Exactly. So there might, now we're seeing an expansion. So, and also you have in physics, you have these oscillating cosmological models. So it's not everyone who believes in a Big Bang. There are also other models where physicists speculate that the universe is expanding now, it might be contracting at some other point.
Exactly. It might just be tissue moving, like macro tissue.
For example,
just moving back and forth. Because that's one of the big revelations reading Martinus, that because you grow up with this idea that the universe started with a Big Bang like 13 billion years ago.
Or with God creating it.
Or God created it. But then it came from a little spark from smaller than a teaspoon, and then kapoom, and then it expanded, and then you have forming like just this indescript matter for a long while, and then you have galaxies forming and planets forming and so on. But he says that's not how it is, and that's like an interesting reorganization of thought, because he says that the universe is eternal. It's always been there. It'll always be there in the future. It can just look like from a certain perspective that things are contracting or expanding. Yeah, and also think just this feeling of eternity. I mean, if you say, what does it matter if you are 13 billion years old or if you are eternal? It sounds almost the same. But for me, like, it gives a different feeling inside. Because if you are a created being that started out at some point versus you're an eternal being, I don't know about you, but it gives a certain other subjective feeling. Think like, I've been here forever and I'll be here forever.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, but also you could think of it as, because we have this stillness at our core, the core of our being that we've touched upon before, which he calls the I, and it's simply there. It's not changing or anything, and so we have to get used to this idea that this is actually what we are.
Yeah,
and so if you really fathom that, or if you kind of get used to that mode of being, you in a way you stop thinking about eternity as something that is expanded from minus infinity to plus infinity, because it's simply here all the time, as a still presence, or how you could put it. But of course, you end up the same place if you just think in temporal terms and just then prolong the kind of temporal existence infinitely into the future and infinitely back into the past.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, and also he makes this point that that God only has an internal experience.
Yeah,
because these organisms nested within organisms like Russian dolls, continuing upwards forever and downwards forever.
I guess we'll be talking about God in a later podcast, but it's true that we can mention that there is the one way he describes God is as the macro being of all macro beings.
Yeah,
so it's kind of the ultimate macro being, you could say. Within which all other beings live and exist and have their being. Yeah. And so for this ultimate macro being, every kind of experience is an inner experience.
It's an experience. Yeah, so God is not sitting on the outside looking in at these Russian dolls. He's like, she is embedded in it for all the time.
Or we're embedded in that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. All right, let's talk about health.
Yeah. So I mean, Martinus had different. I mean, when he wanted to explain his mission, there were some things that he felt were more important than others. Yeah. So first of all, the kind of view he had at all things were very often, if people came to him with very technical questions, he would ask, what has that got to do with morality? Yeah,
so if people come and ask, how does galaxies procreate? He'd be like, I could explain that, but what does it have to do with morality?
Yeah, so that's kind of the basis. And within that context, there were certain issues that he felt more about, they felt more urgent than others. So one thing was how we treat the animals, and for that matter, the plants. So he very strongly, and this has to do with health as well. So morality in Martinus's view also has to do with health. And so he very strongly advocated that we stopped eating animals. And one reason, of course, was out of compassion for the animals, but another reason was that in his view, it actually has a very demolishing effect on our health.
Exactly.
So it creates our organisms are less and less built to consume food from animals.
Yeah, and he says, like, because our organism is still in the physical world, we need fuel for it to run. And we get fuel from the sunlight and from the air and the things we eat at this stage that we are on now. But I also think that, you mentioned that thing about vegetarianism. I think that's one of the most tricky things to explain to people who don't have this spiritual worldview. Because if you are an atheist, vegetarian or vegan, right, people will usually come up to you and say, we've been eating animals for 1 million years. Why should we stop now?
But some though who are atheists perhaps are starting not to eat animals because it's become more and more evident that it actually has a negative impact on your health.
Yeah.
So for health reasons, if not out of compassion for the animals, there are some people who are motivated to plant-based food.
Interesting, but the interesting thing is like it's only unhealthy for us now in this current state, because if you had a caveman 200,000 years ago or a Neanderthal, it's not unhealthy for them to eat animals.
No, I mean the kind of perspective is that, particularly if you're a predator, like a lion, you just eat raw meat, and that's natural for you. It's a life condition. You couldn't survive without, and it's the right thing to do for a lion. When we come to the human state, we see that eating raw meat is not. I mean, especially when you come to more evolved states, we cannot eat raw meat. I know some people still do sometimes, but basically, raw meat is very. It's a very heavy burden, you could say, on the organism, having to digest that. So we've invented things like cooking and frying and so on. And that has been there for a long time. But even when we've fried and cooked meat, there's life. There's a life in these, a microscopic life, you could say, that has to be killed
within your gut,
within your digestive system.
So it's like double karma, both killing the animal and also killing the microbeings of the animal in your gut.
Yeah, and so sometimes you'll call the digestive system the hell zone, just like the animal kingdom in the cosmically evolutionary scale is the health zone. Then the digestive system of the organism is the health zone, because this is where war is happening. Because there it's killing. So the stomach acid, for example, is meant to break down the resistance of these living beings that enter into our into our organism. And this also happens with plants, but it's a lesser evil with respect to plants, because they don't have this nervous system. They don't experience pain like animals. And so even on this microscopic level, there will, according to Martinus, be an experience of pain, being kind of persecuted by the stomach acid.
And it says in nutrition in the proper form in the future should be just fruit, what is growing around the kernel of the around the seed of the of the fruit tree.
He says that's the natural raw meat. And another thing is that he actually suggests that people should feel for themselves what they can eat and what they cannot eat, what works in their organism or not. But he suggests that cooking plants, for example, is better than eating them raw, unless it's the fruit, which is kind of the natural raw meat.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, raw food, not raw meat.
I get what you say. Yeah, and also, just from a karmic perspective, he says that how we treat our micro beings will have an effect of how our macro being treats us. Because most people, you can explain karma to them in terms of how you treat other human beings on the meso level, right?
Yeah.
But actually, karma is also downwards. So if you treat your own body poorly, then you will experience that your macro being treats you poorly. Perhaps you're living in a polluted area, or you have experienced earthquakes or whatever.
Yeah, so this is where I talked about that Martinus had these areas where he felt very strongly an urgent need to convey his kind of vision for life. And so one area was how we treat animals and why we shouldn't eat them. But that's connected to how we treat our microcosm. That is the multitude of living beings that live within our organism and together constitute our organism. So we should learn to love them as well and treat them well. And so eating meat, for example, is actually putting a pressure upon the organism and upon the beings in the organism that is not healthy.
Yeah, it's like the poor lifestyle of any kind is a kind of torture for your microbeings.
Smoking, drinking poisonous drinks like with alcohol and so on.
Yeah, meat, alcohol, tobacco, drugs. That's like the physical stuff. But he also says that bitter thoughts and angry thoughts and so on is like torturing your...
so one thing is our nutrition.
Yeah.
But then there is within... I mean, there's this empty space that is filled with actually the energy that we kind of create through our thinking.
Yeah.
And that has an effect in the microcosm as well.
Yeah.
And this is where he used this comparison with the solar system.
Yeah.
How our life here on this planet is dependent on the right amount of sunlight. So if the sun were more energetic than it is now,
we'll be fried.
All this planet will be desert.
Yeah.
And if it was less energetic than it is right now, it would be like the poles.
Yeah. Be frozen. Yeah.
Everything would be frozen. So anyway, it would be desert on this planet, ice desert or sand desert.
Exactly. So it's true, like the thoughts you have and the feelings you have, there's energy permeating through your being, and it actually matters what kind of energy you put through.
Yeah, and so the thing is that if we have a kind of balanced thinking, like harmonious thinking or thought life, that would have a positive effect.
Yeah.
It would create a balance in the microcosm in terms of these. If you have these minuscule suns that energize the planets, the electrons around them, and on these small minuscule planets, there are living beings like on this planet, and so there's this whole. There's this whole world of beings down there that are dependent on how we eat and how we live in terms of if we get fresh air and our houses are appropriate and so on, and we have the right amount of heat or cold, and also our thinking.
Yeah.
So this thinking is very important as well, and in particular, we've come to a state of evolution where it's not healthy to get mad. It's not healthy to be aggressive.
Yeah.
It's not healthy to feel jealous.
Yeah. Because it's like, he says it's like a world war happening within your organism if you are consumed by anger.
Yeah. You foster war in your own organism if you cultivate these modes of thinking.
So then it goes also for the macro, just to put it in perspective, that you can say like the First and Second World War were like angry outbursts of our macro being and then had to be contained.
Or the macro being somehow being under pressure. So for example, we've talked about earlier that the macro being is going through this great birth right now.
Yeah.
So it's a very advanced being.
Yeah.
But Martinus explained that when he went through his great birth, his birth into Christ consciousness, it had some negative effects on his health.
Yeah.
For one thing, he had for a couple of days or a few days, he had very, very strong headaches.
Yeah.
And we have to think about that the planet is having this experience right now, and it's putting an enormous amount of pressure upon the planet having this experience, being born into this new mode of being. Yeah. And I think what we see as world wars and so on is kind of an effect of the stress and this pressure that is put upon the planet because it's going through this rather difficult transition into a new state of being.
Yeah, what he calls birth pangs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then it's also like you shouldn't judge the planet on what it's going through right now, because you shouldn't judge an apple on not being ripe.
No, but my point is that the planet is ripe to a certain extent,
well,
but it's
almost ripe.
Yeah, it's almost ripe. Yeah, but I mean, we're talking in its own simple perspective. We're talking about minutes, perhaps. So we have to. When we think about this thing, it's of course, in principle, if the planet was mad about something, that would also have a disastrous effect on us.
Yeah.
But I think when we compare it with other things that Martinus say about the planet and how progress it is in evolution, I think more we should think about it being in a kind of stress, because it's undergoing this kind of initiation, right?
Exactly. Also, people used to ask Martinus, right, about whether the planet could commit suicide or nuclear war or global warming, and it's just like, no. The planet is so advanced right now that it's not karmically possible for it to be killed or commit suicide.
Yeah, basically we're in a safe place because of the state of the mental state that the planet has advanced to. But of course, there are still some challenges, and it also has to do with our own. I mean, we have to work out things for ourselves on our own level. So we have to, as we talked about in an earlier episode, we have to overcome all these power struggles that is happening right now.
Yeah.
So we have to contribute to making peace on this planet.
Yeah.
But eventually it will happen, simply because of the state that the planet being is in. It's in a kind of mental state that makes it impossible for whatever is going on right now to end in disaster.
Exactly.
In total disaster.
Yeah. That's true. And there's also, he mentions that you should take care of your body, and every time you have some kind of an ache, it's like micro being sending up a prayer for you to stop doing what you're doing. For instance, you see like people who are into extreme sports, for instance. You mentioned in the previous episodes that these team sports and extreme sports is kind of a residue from the animal kingdom, where you feel like you have to perform and you have to win and so on. But then if you have to do extreme sports, for instance, you are ignoring the pleas from your and the prayers from your micro beings. If your knee starts to hurt after running so long, this is your micro beings. They stop, we can't take it anymore.
Yeah, so pain is actually prayers, cries of need from the microcosm.
Yeah. But it's interesting, he says like that all suffering and bad health and so on is the results of errors in thinking and lack of love. It's because you don't have the cosmic perspective on it. If you eat meat or if you treat other people poorly and so on, it's because you have an error in thinking. Yeah. And then it comes back to you and then you suffer from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to say something?
Yeah, it's just I was thinking about a lot of what we're seeing now in with wars and so on, and the kind of blossoming up of these power struggles also has to do with that going through this initiation, the planet is kind of being purged from its last residues of animal behavior and animal thinking.
Yeah.
And this is what kind of trickles down into our world and what we experience at these international crises and so on. Environmental catastrophes and volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and so on.
Yeah. I say it gives a whole other perspective on global warming, for instance. It's like it's the macro being having an experience. It's not so much the micro being's fault. It's like the macro being going through a certain karma.
Yeah, I guess it goes both ways in a sense that we also have a responsibility, but that's a longer discussion.
Yeah, there's a whole can of worms we can open there.
Yeah,
Just to say that, because like sometimes
it's not just up to us. That's for sure.
It's not just up to us, but just to say that, because sometimes if you are an atheist environmentalist, you don't have the perspective that the Earth is a living being of itself that
has a will.
That has a will and has a development and it has like thoughts and feelings and so on. It's a whole other perspective. Yeah. And also, just like this whole thing about eating a vegetarian diet, as Martinus, he expands the scope, so to speak, of what, like because he expands the scope from the meso also to the macro and the micro, because at Jesus' time, when he came as a world redeemer and he preached his moral philosophy, it was very much on the meso level, because back then people didn't know anything about galaxies or planets of other solar systems. It was only in the 1990s that actually astronomers discovered that there are planets in other solar systems. Until then, it was just pure speculation. And then Martinus, he expanded this view of love, not only to make it logical, but also say that it also has to include the animals, because the killing principle, you shall not kill, is not only other humans, but also animals. But if Jesus had said it back in the day, 2,000 years ago, people wouldn't understand it.
No, and they surely wouldn't understand that we should love our microcosm, our microcosmic beings as well.
Yeah.
So love, it has to be love all the way around, upwards into the macrocosmos, outwards into the mesocosmos, and downwards into the microcosm.
Yeah, exactly. And he also mentioned he wrote a book about funerals, right?
He goes into that as well, cremation in particular, and describes how we should learn to treat our bodies, our dead bodies, in a manner that kind of respects and honor the life that is still there.
Yeah.
So although, I mean, we know that when we die, when we leave the body, the organ systems, they die as well.
Yeah.
The cells will also die. But at even lower levels, there are still living beings, and gradually this living, you can say the living beings, the conditions will degenerate. So you'll have living beings of lower and lower, say, evolutionary status, but and eventually it'll just be mineral matter.
Yeah.
But he believed that we should find methods actually to keep the body intact.
Yeah.
For as long as possible until it's mineral matter, because then we can do whatever we want to do with it without hurting any kind of life.
Yeah, but he mentioned some kind of mummification, right, would be beneficial, and he is like using some whatever chemicals to preserve the body in a somewhat natural state.
Yeah, but also he believed that there would be a science around this that will evolve in the future.
Yeah.
But already now, of course, you can conserve your body, and also, for example, you will have in your digestive system, you will have bacteria and so on that will actually devour the rest of the body if the body is not protected against them. So it can be a lesser evil to kill these bacteria for the sake of the whole body.
Yeah.
Than just leaving it. So even just sparing your body is also something that Martinus did not speak for, because that means still leaving the body kind of defenseless.
Yeah, and he says it will be eaten up by bacteria, and then kind of that's a karma that it will receive.
Yeah, so there's of course when we talk about these things with health, there's also this how we treat our organism will have a karmic effect somehow. And he mentions some. So, for example, he says that if you burn your body in future lives, you will not be protected against you yourself burning in a fire.
Yeah,
and also if you just leave it to the bacteria, you will not be protected against infections of different kinds, for example.
Yeah.
So one of the things that he talks about when he talks about health is that the strongest immune system is actually to love our fellow beings on all levels and only do good.
And that's the best insurance you can get.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you also mentioned that, like, at least nowadays, until we have developed this high-tech mummification technology, then burial is a lesser evil than cremation.
Yeah, for sure. And so very often also in practical circumstances, we simply have to choose the lesser evil.
Yeah.
And even if you don't bury a body, but you conserve it somehow using these chemical substances, you will still kill the bacteria in the digestive tract.
Yeah.
So we're not at the place right now where we only can do good. There's also, so it's about choosing the lesser evil, whatever we choose to do.
Yeah, that's true. And he also mentioned that he also frequently asked about health advice and so on. And he says, like, if you want normal good health, you should live a normal life and avoid excesses, because he says for a good life, there's no particular shortcuts. You can't go on a fasting trip, or you can't like take a weekend seminar and so on, because like how your organism develops is a long process through various lives. And it's just like, even it's like obesity, for instance, it's because your talent kernels for developing a body has been stressed out in a previous life. You've been eating too much through various incarnations, and you cannot just reverse obesity with like one cure or one fasting trip once.
No, so normally as much time as we spend to come off track, we have to spend to get back on track. That's the kind of the basic principle.
Yeah.
So we need you need will but also patience.
Yeah.
To change your life and get back on track.
Yeah. Because what he mentions about the talent kernels that we have, that we can develop talent kernels both like mentally, intelligence-wise, being very good at math or literature or whatever, or also physically, you can exercise your body. You should also, like when babies are born and children and teenagers, it's very obvious that some are much more athletic than others. And it's like, was it only in this life they developed that? No, they've been practicing that in previous lives. And you can also destroy that to some extent. He mentions alcoholism, for instance. If you do heavy duty drinking for one or two or three lives, you can damage your mental and spiritual faculties to such an extent that you'll be born physically, mentally handicapped. And he mentioned like Down syndrome, for instance, is a result of mistreating your talent kernels and your bodily and spiritual functions in previous lives.
Yeah, and we should add here that Martinus is not in any way judgmental when he's saying that. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it's not like he wants to say kind of pointing at someone and saying you're the person who's responsible for your destiny. Of course you are, but the real responsibility, in a sense, lies with our ignorance. Yeah. So it's not like when we end up in these situations, it's because we couldn't do anything else. Yeah. And so he would very often advocate that what people who are in dire circumstances need from us is our love and our friendship, no matter what kind of state they're in.
Exactly, and it says like you should be like the sun and shine on everybody, regardless of their moral standing.
And also, you talked about that if you want the normal health, you must lead a normal life. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard people ask, well, what kind of spiritual practice do Martinus recommend? Mm-hmm. And I think the way he puts his emphasis here is that our daily life is our spiritual practice.
Yeah, how we treat other people,
how we treat other beings, in general, is should be our focus. Mm-hmm. And as you said, trying to be like the sun. Yeah. And let our warmth and love shine on everyone, no matter what kind of condition they're in, or even how they treat us.
Yeah, that's what he says, that you cannot think you have a good relationship with God and have a bad relationship with other people. That's not how it works, because other people and other beings, they are also part of the Godhead. They're, God's sons and manifestations of the Godhead.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that on a later episode. But for example, he says if you pray about something, but your daily actions go in another direction, then it's like whispering to God what you want and then shouting what you do not want.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Yeah, and also he mentions this, like, for instance, we talked a lot about food and nutrition and so on, but also having positive thoughts and not having martyr thoughts. And he mentioned also that humor is very important. He mentioned a couple of times that the universe is a really humorous place. It's a funny place. And a good laugh that vibrates through your organism is as healthy as anything.
Yes. Yeah. And you once said, if you're in a good mood, you get good karma. If you're in a bad mood, you get bad karma. So it's all about being in a good mood.
It's actually true. He mentioned that if you're in a really bad mood, then you're kind of vulnerable for karmic attack, so to speak. Yeah, things you have sent out yourself, of course, but like you also see that if people have very low charisma, a very dimmed aura, and so on, they seem more receptive to getting hit.
Yeah, and maybe we should repeat what I think we touched upon in our episode on reincarnation and karma. Yeah. That the karma we get it's not a mechanical, it's not a mechanism. Yeah. There's a kind of wisdom to it. It in the sense that it's about vibrational patterns. This is why being in a bad mood opens you to bad karma. But it also means that you can actually protect yourself if you somehow get transformed. So you might have done terrible things in the past when you were in a different state, but it's some kind of transformation happens to your being, and you get into a better place mentally and morally. Yeah, you will be protected from these karmic arcs. They won't be able to reach you.
Reach you in the same way. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and it says also just having the mindset in itself that you are living in a loving universe that responds to you. Like if you're living in a macro being that is alive and vibrating with divine energy, just having that mindset in itself is enlivening the body. And because I think, I haven't seen the statistics of it, but I think there are more depressed people among atheists, because if you have this basic view that it's just randomness and pitiless indifference everywhere and just survival of the fittest, that's a really depressing way of looking at things, right? And I think it'll just vibrate through your being to some sense and make you more depressed, rather than having an idea that you're having a constant correspondence with your micro and meso and macro beings.
Yeah, and also just remembering all the time that all our experiences are part of this correspondence. Yeah. So everything we experience is utterances in our communication with the Godhead.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we'll get into that later episode about prayer.